This week on Jerusalem Dateline, with ISIS largely defeated in Syria, who will stop Iran from spreading out there? And for the first time in 2 years, Israeli Knesset members ascend the Temple Mount. Plus, a biblically based youth leadership training center in Israel's biblical heartland. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. With ISIS largely defeated in Syria, Israel is sounding the alarm about Iran's intentions there to fill the power vacuum along what used to be Israel's quietest border. From his recent meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to the visit of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has one message.
Iran is busy turning Syria into a base of military entrenchment, and it wants to use Syria and Lebanon as war fronts against its declared goal to eradicate Israel. This is something Israel cannot accept.
A senior Israeli official was even quoted recently as warning Russia that Israel would bomb Syrian President Bashar Assad's palace in Damascus if Russia allowed Iran to make military advances in Syria. In an interview with the Jerusalem Post, U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman said that the U.S. and Israel are of the same mind when it comes to keeping Iran from spreading out in Syria.
Iran is a scorpion that will bite you eventually, and you can't cozy up to them.
You see a growing concern in the United States about where Iran is headed and what their intentions are.
Visiting U.S. lawmakers voiced their support for a strong U.S. position.
So that means, yes, sanctions, but it also means beefing up our military so that we can deal with this growing threat.
If there is no future for them or no accommodation for the Sunni Arab in both Syria and Iraq, then it's just going to be some new black flag group, round 14 of whatever other conflict you want to try to spin it off from.
Oklahoma Senator James Lankford says the U.S. hasn't been clear on Syria policy.
Iran is currently propping up Bashar Assad, and if we leave Assad in place there, then that means Bashar Assad owes his position to Iran, and Iran's going to do whatever they want in Syria. That's a threat to Israel.
But one thing's for sure, he said, Assad has to go.
We have to be very clear to the Russians, to the Iranians, and to the people of Syria that there has to be a transition. 10 million refugees cannot return to Syria if Assad is still there. The reason they fled was because of Assad.
That transition, he said, is in the best interest of Israel and the refugees. I'm joined now by CBN senior editor John Wogge to talk more about U.S. policy and the threat of Iran. John, welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline and welcome back to Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. Great to be here.
Well, it's clear that Israel is not happy with the world's policy or the world's approach to business as usual of Iran in Syria. Is that message being received in the Trump White House?
Well, there's no doubt, Julie, that the message is being received. The question is whether it's being acted upon. And I think that the Trump White House, there's still a lot of sympathy and certainly a lot of knowledge. You know, there was a Mossad delegation, the Israeli intelligence service, that went to Washington to explain Israel's concerns just a couple weeks ago about Iran's role in Syria and the threat it poses to Israel. So they know about it and they know it in detail, what's happening there. The question is where it falls on the priority order. President Trump may have a heart for it, and he is on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu quite frequently. So he knows about how important Iran is to Israel. The question is whether his administration, in dealing with all the fires to put out, whether it's North Korea or Syria or ISIS attacking places like Barcelona, that's where you've got to put it higher on the priority level. And right now, it doesn't seem that Iran's presence in Syria is generating that high priority target within Washington that Israel would like to see happen.
Now, we had some U.S. lawmakers here recently, and they were very tough. They were very clear that Assad had to go, that Iran was not allowed to be spread out. Do you think that all that is just talk, or Washington will actually act on it and have some deeds to back that up?
Well, I have no doubt that the congressman and the senator who was here, the ones you talked to in the story, they are completely sincere about the threat of Assad reestablishing power. Who would have thought 3 years ago when Barack Obama was saying Assad must go, and it was kind of generally agreed in Washington that that would happen, that now people are talking about him reassuming almost all the power that he had before. I mean, that's the kind of issue that's really troublesome for senators like James Langford and others, Tom Cotton, in Washington. So there's definitely a remnant of people within the Washington power structure who want to see Iran dealt with, want to see Syria dealt with, and want to see Israel protected from this encroachment that Iran is just blatantly doing. The problem is that the rest of the world is doing multiple billions of dollars of business with Iran, and they'd rather the whole Israel problem with them just go away.
Yeah, is it going to go away?
No, it's not going to go away. And there are anniversaries coming up. Israel's about to celebrate its 70th anniversary as a nation next year in 2018. Iran will be celebrating 40 years since the mullahs came to power there. And what we're looking at is a world who's done literally almost nothing to stop their advances. There's been a lot of rhetoric and a lot of real warnings, especially from Prime Minister Netanyahu, about the threat that Iran poses not only to Israel but to the entire world, and yet the world would rather do business with Iran than deal with them in any kind of military way, despite the agreement that they've got.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how they kind of just keep spreading out, and nobody really seems to mind that they're doing that.
And that brings biblical prophecy into play. It's looking an awful lot with Russia aiding Iran in this process that the prophecies of Ezekiel coming against Israel seem to be at least in line to come closer. So.
Wow, yeah, so it's going to be exciting times ahead.
Time to be praying.
Thank you so much for your insights, John.
Thank you, Julie.
Up next, should Jews and Christians be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount? Should Jews, Christians, and other non-Muslims be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount? Palestinians, Jordanians, and many Muslims say a resounding no. Israel's High Court guarantees freedom of access to Jerusalem's Temple Mount, including freedom of worship, but the police prevent it out of fear of Palestinian riots. Still, more and more Israelis are demanding those freedoms. 2 Knesset members went up to the Temple Mount after the government eased up on the rule banning lawmakers from the site. John Woggy has that story.
Muslims call it Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary in Arabic. Al-Aqsa, including the mosque and the entire compound, is the 3rd holiest site in Islam. Muslims claim only they are allowed to pray there.
Muslims have to pray, but others, Christians and Jews, they can visit, just visit. Not to make pray inside.
For Jews, the Temple Mount is the most sacred place on earth. 2 Jewish temples stood here during Bible times. Jesus visited, preached, and worshiped at the 2nd temple before it was destroyed. But Muslims say it never existed.
Archaeology backs up the Bible, which says it's our holiest place. It's the center. From the beginning of the Jewish people, many think from the beginning of the world, it's the center.
For years, rabbis said it was forbidden for Jews even to set foot there, let alone pray on the Temple Mount, because it was too holy. Now religious and non-religious Jews want their rights secured to this most holy place. Linda Olmert is Deputy Director of the Temple Mount Heritage Foundation.
because we want freedom for everybody to pray on the Temple Mount. Isaiah says it will be a place for all nations.
For the first time in 2 years, Israel's government recently allowed 2 Knesset members to visit the Temple Mount. One of them was Yehuda Glick, who survived an assassination attempt because of his Temple Mount activism. Left-wing Israelis protested his visit, fearing Arab violence.
Those provocations that our members of Knesset are doing on the Temple Mount are not only dangerous, they are also violating what the Jewish tradition is about, which is sovereignty and inclusion.
But Glick rejects the idea that he is provoking violence by going to a Jewish holy site.
I call upon you to cooperate with us, all of those together who want peace in this place, and stop blaming others, and stop saying, look, because you go to Temple Mount, the terror is because of the terrorists, and it's because of those inciting it, and we are not giving the terrorists any presence.
Since the 1967 Six-Day War, Jordan has kept religious control over the Temple Mount. Israel maintains security, and only Muslims can pray there. Israeli officials keep a tight rein on Jewish visits to the site to prevent Muslim violence. Yossi Kuperwasser is former Director General of the Strategic Affairs Ministry.
We believe that by committing ourselves to this status quo, we help keep the peace and security in Jerusalem.
But Olmert says it's all about civil rights.
The only place I know, certainly in Israel, where there is a real violation of civil rights as we have come to expect them in the Western world, in free democratic countries, is against Jews on the Temple Mount.
And she says there's plenty of room for everyone.
And I believe that when the Messiah comes, he'll solve all the problems. Should there be, until then, I believe that there's a place for all nations on the Temple Mount.
John Wagi, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, hear what one author says about growing anti-Israel sentiments in the church. Tuvia Tenenbaum and his wife Miriam are popular writers who do their research out on the streets among the people. I spoke with them earlier about their latest book, The Lies They Tell, based on a trip across America. Here are some of the highlights. So Tuvia and Miriam Tenenbaum, welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline.
Welcome to you. It's a pleasure to see you again.
So you're going to talk to us about your new book, The Lies They Tell.
Yeah. It is about the U.S. of A, exactly.
Yeah, so tell us, why did you write this book?
I went with my dear wife, Izzy Tenenbaum, and together we drove around the United States, 28 states, plus Washington, D.C. And the idea is to know who are the Americans, what is America, what is the spirit of America. And this was a very interesting, especially for me, because I have been living in America for over 30 years.
Yeah, and what did you find?
I realized how much racism is in the country. You go into the hoods, into black ghettos, what you see there is, at least I was totally unprepared for it. I've been with my wife before in refugee camps in Jordan. Places after I left, I was crying. But those refugee camps in Jordan are paradise, plaza, in comparison to what you have in the black ghettos. And nobody knows, the residents, the people who live there, don't know when they walk out of the house if they will ever come back. Yeah. The rate of exchange of fire is amazing. In some places, there were police in the front and saying, "Mister, please get out of here. Don't come even near it." And nobody cares about the people who die there. Not the right-wingers, not the left-wingers, not even Black Lives Matter. Amazing to see the Indian reservations. They have money, they have casinos, they get grants from the government. And you go to those reservations, you see people, young people, sit there with the glasses of alcohol.
Wow.
And then, sadly, is the churches. Yeah. America has been noted for quite a few years in our recent history to be practically the only supporter of Israel in international forums. And you think it's because of the people. And you realize, yes, it's not just politics, it's also the people, but the generations change. It's different between the older generation and the younger generation.
So how do they relate to Israel?
Either they come to you with the replacement theology, which has been very, very badly in terms of Christian-Jewish relationship, called a lot of death in the Jewish community, and they say to you, young people, they say, God does not love the Jews anymore.
Wow.
We are the chosen people.
Wow.
And that's one thing. And the other things you would say to you, and international things, and you would say, we ask them, are you for Israel or for Palestine? For Palestine. Wow. Free Palestine. Wow. And when I asked them, Judy, where is Palestine? Yeah. That they don't know.
So Miriam, what impacted you the most about this?
Well, first of all, America is a gorgeous country, beautiful. But on the other side, like even if you go to Montana or South Dakota, people have an opinion about Israel and Palestine. I thought nobody would care about it, but people do care. Yeah. People have an opinion, and that was very surprising to me.
Was it regional at all? Like in certain areas there were different things, or it was kind of across the board?
What was surprising was the fear of talking, the lack of freedom of speech.
And how did you represent yourselves to the people you questioned?
We just said we are journalists, we are coming to write a book about the United States, and we want to know who are you, the Americans. Just tell us what you think, what you believe on different subjects, be it climate change, be it Israel, be it your faith.
What about anti-Semitism in general? Like, did you feel like there's a growing anti-Semitism there?
There is a growing anti-Semitism, and you can see it. You know, they keep saying over and over, the Jews are rich, the Jews are Nazis, the Jews are, abusing other people, the Jews take advantage. But what I didn't know is the levels of it. Like Jewish students in universities, in top universities, like, for example, UC Berkeley, they say to me, the ones who are pro-Israel and like Israel, I say, we don't open our mouth.
Wow.
If we said anything, we'd be basically outcast, we'd be boycotted, it's like...
Interesting.
And that's it.
And just get out.
Get it out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you.
All the best. Up next, a biblically based leadership training center for Israeli youth. A partnership between Jews and Christians is building a one-of-a-kind training center in the biblical heartland of Israel. As Chris Mitchell reports from Ariel, some see it as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Ziplining can be a blast, and it's even better when the fun includes a purpose.
This place is amazing. There is so much important things here. It prepares you to be able to do things that you couldn't believe that you will do.
And that's the goal of the National Leadership Training Center. Its strategy? Use physical challenges, teamwork, and the Bible to teach principles of leadership.
So every day here, there is children all over Israel is coming. We speak with them about David and about Moses. We speak about their leadership and their places in life and how they can dream to be like them and how they can put God inside their heart. We are reading verses from the Bible, so this is part of the thing that we are doing here.
The idea came about after kids from Ariel visited a Christian retreat in the U.S. called J.H. Ranch. Ranch directors Heather Johnston and her husband Bruce first suggested the idea of a similar training program for Israel's young people to Ariel's late mayor.
Ron Nachman came to J.H. Ranch himself, and while he was there, we shook hands across the table on 7707 and agreed that we would build together a national leadership site for Israel.
Johnston sees it as a fulfillment of prophecy.
Ezekiel foresaw that once the cities would be rebuilt and the Jews would gather on the mountains of Judea and Samaria, he said in verse 26 of chapter 36, I will take out the heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh and put a new spirit in you. And we just foresaw that that was going to be the next step. We believe that God has begun a movement in the country, something that is going to continue.
Endorsed by Israel's education ministry, the program focuses on biblical characters to help teach lessons. For example, this obstacle is called Goliath. Participants stand on an 18-inch platform at the top of a 30-foot pole. They jump 7 feet out and 7 feet up to grab a trapeze. I decided to give it a try.
The pole represents Goliath, the intimidating giant that stood and ridiculed Israel and literally stopped the military in their tracks. Well, in a similar way, we have Goliaths in our life, these huge giants, circumstantially, relationally, and we have to somehow find ourselves overcoming that or not overcoming it and trusting God at the same time, because the person on belay, if you happen to miss the trapeze, guess what? You've just done a free fall into the open space. But the wonderful thing is that the belayer below is God. That person acts like God in your life, and they're always going to catch you.
The pole shakes a little bit, and now the thing is to get over the platform. And there's a reason they call it the leap of faith.
And yes, it was quite the challenge. After more than 10 years in the making, the center attracts people from all over Israel.
People are telling each other over the medias, over people that bringing their friends. This is the way that we are recruiting people to come here.
Johnston describes it as a remarkable partnership between Christians and Jews.
It makes me feel like that we're a part of the unfolding of biblical history. God said, I'm going to beckon to the Gentiles, Isaiah 49:22, and I'm going to lift a banner to the nations, and they're going to carry you. They're going to put your daughters on their shoulders, your sons into their arms. In other words, when I want to rebuild this nation, I'm going to do it relationally.
The park has already had a positive impact across generations and worldviews.
I see here children that changing, I see parents changing, I see parents and teenagers that start speaking with each other. I see Arabs and Jews speaking together. I see religious and non-religious speaking together. And my heart is filled with hope that we are going to have a better Israel that's going to impact all the world.
And remember my decision to take the challenge? See for yourself. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Ariel, in biblical Samaria.
That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. For more stories like these, be sure to follow us throughout the week on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember, the God that's watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.